Well, hello, 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 hello. This is the place with Shah. Welcome, welcome as every Tuesday, 12 o'clock. I'll see you right here. This is definitely not the scene that I want to show you, but we need to fix that real quick. I don't know what's going on. Maybe we'll do this first, right? If you don't know what this is about, this is Shaw at the place. Here for more connections and more answers. As always, at the place, we have a new topic for you today. So, and a couple of announcements. So, I hope you like this all before we jump in. You know, let me always ask you, of course, right, to subscribe on our new YouTube channel. And if you want to just follow us on Facebook, then that's, of course, really nice as well. Just give me a little second. I'm alone, all alone today, so I'm just going to check if I am live also here on if everything works well. Yes, it does, actually, it does. Today, this topic is about, does failure really help us to succeed, or is that a modern myth? Because, a lot of people say, you need to fail a lot to learn and stuff like that. And I am actually one of them. So we're going through that too. Um, and see if that's all true, if that's really, what's going on. Let me see if there's some people for me waiting on Zoom. Yeah, and if you want to leave some comments on Facebook or maybe just saying, hey, hello, I'm here, then that's of course always nice. I will, um, I will open Facebook and see if I can follow any of the comments as well at the same time. And does failure really help us to succeed, or is that a modern myth? But as always, I also would like to introduce you what number it is of today, the number of the episode. I forgot all about that. It is actually number 210, if I'm not mistaken, of Tell. So welcome people who are actually always listening to us on the podcast. Tell, yeah, if you just like to listen more to my voice than just only see my face, then do that as well. Tell and the place, they are always based on the five life energies. And as you know, the five life energies are physical energy. We have, of course, mental energy. We have creative energy. We have manifestation energy and divine energy. And I introduced those five energies for the first time in my best selling book, Broken Silence. And as you know, Broken Silence is not only about my story of abuse, but definitely how you can overcome and how you can lead a thriving life after sexual abuse. So if you didn't have a copy yet, just pick one up. All the money goes to a non-profit organization. But without further ado, let's um, let's start with the topic of today. I think it's an interesting one, and I definitely tell you a little bit the background of it as I go through it. Right. So as a coach and as a teacher, I always believe that you definitely also have to, take lessons yourself. If you stop learning, you have no business in teaching. And if you don't take coaching yourself, I don't think you have any business in coaching, to be honest. Things move fastly. And with one coaching group, and if you are, if you're an online marketeer, I would, and you're basically in the startup phase, I would highly recommend that group to you. And if you send me a personal message, then I will definitely forward you that group. And it's not led by me, so I'm just a member of it. But one of the things and one of the leaders there, or the leader of that group, did a really good talk about mindset. And one of the things that were talked about is that we learn from our failures, and we do, of course, we learn from our failures. But in modern time today, definitely in business specifically, I think it's a little bit overrated that we only learn from our failures. And some people even say, and I said it in my intro too, just just to challenge that a little bit, is so if you receive my email, many of you do, then it says we learn through our failures and therefore fail fast. And it's a modern coaching mantra. But does failure actually deliver as promised? Do we learn from our failure more than we learn from success? And does failure offer us an important lesson about life success, or is that a modern myth? That is actually what I am talking about today, because I do think it's highly overrated. But if you Google, that's the funny thing, right? If you Google about failure and the fear of failure, you find hundreds of articles that actually says, no, it's really good to fail, you learn from it and stuff like that. So yeah, to come out now with that it's not entirely true is not only contradict what you sometimes say, but it's definitely contradicting what a lot of people say, on the internet. Well, on one hand, I care less what other people say, but I do care, of course. But, it would not be the place, or it would not be Tell, the Everyday Life Lesson podcast, if I would not be here. And then once in a while, I would debunk one of these things and saying that failure really helps us to succeed, and that's only true to actually some extent, right? So if that's to your interest, and I hope that's to all of your interest, then stay tuned for what's coming up next, right? Let me switch a little bit to a different screen here. What do you think about my background, by the way? That's always made by Irene, my partner in crime. She's also my dance partner, and she always makes this beautiful backgrounds as well. So highly creative, has nothing to do with the topic of today, but once in a while I just want to mention that. Okay, so the other things that we actually noticed to this week, by the way, we had a little bit of car problems. Strangely enough, not only us, but the people around us also had car problems. But so we were looking for a different car. Don't call me now with all kind of offers and stuff like that and advices, but because we did our homework on the car thing. But and I was joking about with other people that we have all these supply issues. But if you are in Dallas and you know something about cars, then you go to a regular car dealer here. Usually the parking lot would be full of cars. They have so many cars in stock. So, but strangely enough, we went to, I don't know, 4, 5, 6 car dealers, and there was nothing. The people are literally waiting in line to buy a car. So that's crazy. But I want to warn you as a business person, right? Still, they say it's either a buyer or a seller's market. It only is a really seller's market if you show more that you want it. To the ones that's selling it, or the other way around. If you want to sell something and you're too eager to sell, that's still a mental mindset too. It's something what actually came up in that group that I was talking about as well. Very interesting way to see it is it always good to, in this case it's a seller's market, so is it always good to show them that you are in high need of something, and would that affect your negotiation position? Now, again, had nothing to do with this topic, but it just came to my mind, right? Jean has that a lot, right? To digress and to go off the whatever you call that path. But let's move on. Let's talk a little bit first about pain versus gain, or pain versus pleasure, right? We have been there a lot too, and I use that coaching model still. People are by far more motivated by avoiding pain versus gaining pleasure. Yeah, people are by far more motivated in most cases by avoiding pain than versus pleasure. And actually, the same people who talk about that failure is such a good learning experience, which it is to some extent. So I'm not completely negate what it is. I'm just saying it's maybe not as strong as most people want to believe. Not nowadays, by the way. But you have to think about it. Pain causes failure causes pain. So if you use failure wrongly in the learning process, it actually feels like pain. And if pain is connected to failure, right, then the fear of failure, it becomes bigger. Now, there is something to do about fear of failure. And we'll talk about that too, but it's better to not go into that fear at all, right? So people do a lot of things to avoid pain, and they do more. And so then it becomes a real big motivator to not feel that pain again. And therefore, if failure would be a good learning experience, right? Then people actually start to avoid that, because and that does that not true. That promise is not true. That failure is a way to learn best. Now, that person I was talking to about, his name is David, by the way. I think it's okay to say his first name, and I will ask him. By the way, I talked to him on Thursday. See if I mentioned the group in this podcast. If I can actually mention his full name. That's the beauty about podcasts. You can do whatever you want, and it's all about mindset. So let me also say this at the beginning. Highly goal-oriented people and who've been through this process that I talk about a lot, yes, they learn a little bit more about failures than most people. Yeah. So to use all these general things like, fail fast and you go and you grow fast, failure is only learning. And I used to say, if you replace failure by learning, failure cease to exist, which is true, but it's actually only true for a very small group of people. And so I'm correcting myself here maybe too as well. So hate me or love me for it, but learning is a moving process. So we go on and learn more from this as well. So pain versus gain, right? We remember this. We learn more from avoiding pain. Oh no, sorry. We are more motivated by avoiding pain, right, than by gaining pleasure, and that's an important thing. So if failure becomes painful, which is it for a lot of people, then there is actually no learning in it. So I will also give you quite a few tips how to make sure, or how to help you not to get so much pain from failure. Does that make sense? So then it can become a learning experience, but there's only half part of the story, right? Because you also have to learn, do we then learn less from successes? Which is actually absolutely not true either, right? So we have lately, if you look at it specifically in business, there's so much focus. Okay, let's fail. If we fail a lot, then we win a lot. And there are nice examples on there, and I will give you a few too, so that then it feels supported. But sometimes we leave out the other part of the story. Does that then mean that you learn less from successes? Or is there maybe another truth to that as well? So we'll look at both of them. So let's dive in a little bit deeper, right? So let's first go a little bit away from making sure that you feel failure as pain. So why do we feel failure as a pain? Is because of probably 5-6 reasons. I don't know how far I will come in this episode, but we often take failure very personal, right? And forget that's a universal thing. Everyone fails. And not a big deal at all, right? At least in most cases. But we take it very personal, and we sometimes think that we're really unique in it. And in some things, when you're really unique in it, you set yourself apart. That could actually lead, and you don't like that, by the way. Most people don't like that, to at least not negatively be seen apart, and therefore we think it's failure. Well, other people already moved on, saying, "Hey, that's okay, man. That happens to everyone," and they mean it actually. That happens to everyone. So if you make a mistake in traffic, that happens the whole day, every day, constantly. Now that doesn't mean that I'm saying you should make you should make a lot of traffic mistakes, and a lot of those mistakes, they actually just were near accidents, and you learn from them. That's great, but there's no reasons to make them on purpose to learn. See, so I'm already getting into it, right? Yes, there is a part that's true from it. If you made a mistake, and lucky you were not in an accident, or maybe a very minor accident, then you will learn from it, obviously. but there's no point in making on purpose, more mistakes so that you learn faster, right? You don't actually, let's hit the traffic light red, push through red traffic light a little bit more, or driving too fast through a curve is also, if you wanna be a racer or something, a Formula One racer, and you do that on a safe environment, okay, then you can maybe make some of those mistakes and see if you can learn from it. Okay, so that's number one, right? Failing is personal, and we compare ourselves to successful people and forget that they also have experienced many letdowns in the journey to the top. So that has to do with the fear of of failure, right? So this is very much in the line where people say, you need to learn from your mistakes, and you do because you make mistakes. I'm not saying you need to avoid mistakes. I'm just saying you don't on purposely always have to make mistakes, which some people believe you need to do. Yeah, the cost of failure is great. Yeah, the cost of failure can be really great. And sometimes it is, and that's very regretful if that's the case, of course. But we don't have to magnify our mistakes, right? Or so and jump to a conclusion that the fallout is so big, so that would cause that pain again. So it is good before we go into that other part to understand these principles as well. That we all have a little bit of a tendency to either when we made a mistake think that the fallout is really great, or before we actually do something, and in the case that we make a mistake, that it would be a disastrous thing. So you have that a little bit when you first drive a car. Maybe I'll stick a little bit to the car driving today. Yeah, in the beginning, you are really afraid of making mistakes because you immediately think, oh, I might get into an accident. Well, driving a car has that in there. There is no way that you can drive a car without any risk that you will get in an accident. And the more experienced you are, which comes through doing it a lot, is you know what works well and what doesn't work well. And what doesn't work well, you learn through your failures. And maybe what works well, you learned not only through your failures, by the way. That's the point that I'm making. Yeah? Okay, so if that fear is too big, then you would never go into a car, right? So someone has to talk to you. Yeah, everyone make mistakes. Most of the times when you make a mistake in traffic, it's not so disastrous, right? Here's one thing I sometimes, I have to admit, I sometimes do use my phone in the car, and that's dumb. We shouldn't, right? We definitely should not, and I should definitely also not. And it's some people were saying hi. Let me say hi back to you guys on Facebook for a moment. I see Stephanie is there. I see Matthew is there. I see Selena is there. Hey, Selena, I haven't seen you in a long time. Say hi to me again, and maybe you want to jump on. So it's some people there, right? So they made their messages to me, so that means that they also can see it on Facebook. So it's okay if I say them. Um, um, so where was I? Uh, see, that's so Sean, right? Yeah, we were driving the car. Oh yeah, most of the time when you go into driving a car, most of the mistakes that you make are not that big, and but the thing is here is is I sometimes text behind the steering wheel, and it's super dangerous, right? It's the fastest growing way to get into an accident, and I still once in a while do it. Once in a while, I have to say that. And then once in a while, I notice that I swirl or cannot stay in my lane when I do that. That's a small mistake, but it's a really dumb thing. So please don't do what I just did, what I just told you that I did. And so here is the thing, right? It's a small mistake, and I should learn from it and not to do it. But there's always two sides of these things, right? And so you could definitely new drivers or any drivers, you could tell them, most of the mistakes that you make actually, the cost of the failure is not that great, but they can be, right? But if you only focus on what can be, on the biggest outcome of failure, then you won't do anything. But you, of course, need to be aware of it. To do that. So in this case, I hope I learned a little bit from my failures when I swirled a car. So this is a case that actually goes, on one side saying, hey, you learn from your failures. I didn't say you didn't. I just said you learn way less from your failures than most people actually think. All right. I think we were at number 3. And that is actually really talking to this point and saying, hey, there's no benefit in failure. A lot of people believe that too, by the way, so they are a little bit more on my side, saying, hey, yeah, actually, you're right this time. Well, actually, I'm always right, but you're right this time there are benefits in failure. Yeah, you can actually learn from your failures, absolutely. I didn't say that you can't, I just said it is way less that I have. Actually, by the way, the person who wrote this part of this article actually said he finished this part with there's no benefit of failure. He actually was also writing, I think it's really good to make mistakes. And I don't think it is, right? I just think it's to some extent. I think it's not good to have fear of failure. That's a whole different thing, right? Think about it. If you are a surgeon, would you ever on purposely make mistakes? You will make them and you will learn from them, but you will not make them to learn more. See, does that make sense? That's kind of not smart. Yeah? Okay. So we talk a little bit still about the fear of failure, right? So some people believe that if they fail, then they are a failure. No. If you fail, you're still not a failure, a complete failure, right? You just made a mistake, right? But, I grew up, and yesterday was a year ago that my dad passed away. And he was 97, so he would have been 98 now. He had a good life, I think, for the most part. And I loved him, but I talked in this podcast sometimes about him too, because he definitely had a certain side to him that I could not always agree with, let's put it that way, right? And one of the things is he was very tough on people, and he believed, and it's in my belief at least, I'm not saying that it's true, but I think his standards were super high, right? So it was really hard to live up to his standards. At least that's some of the kids believe. Maybe that's not even true. I cannot talk to my dad anymore, so maybe I should have asked. But it's definitely an assumption that I lived with for my whole life, to be honest. But if you live in an environment where the standards are so high, then it could also cause, so that's the other side, then it could also cause that you don't dare to make a failure, because then you believe that a failure makes you a failure. You see, there is another thing that I say, that whole thing about fail more, and you learn more is not always true. You also have to look at the circumstances you live in. If you live with someone or you live in a company where people actually put standards so high, almost unachievable, failure is not a good thing in that environment. You would learn way more from your successes than failure. And maybe that is an environment that's necessary, right? There are simple professions where failure is almost not an option. That doesn't mean that the people who lead that don't know that failure doesn't exist. They do know that it exists, but the failure in some jobs can be very disastrous, right? In most cases, it's not. By the way, 90% of the people do things where if they make a normal mistake, it's not a big deal at all. That doesn't mean that you just make failures whenever you want. I'm just saying it. But there are jobs where failures, if they make a failure, so some of the people I know, they are high-level surgeons. If they make a mistake, it's probably oops. And it's a bad oops. So sometimes I joke to those people, hey, how many times did you say oops this week? And they joke back to me and say, oh, only 2 times, Sean, not a big deal. But of course, they don't say that. So if you cannot withstand that pressure of failure, you are not, equipped to do a job like that. And it's a special person, special training, you need that. But if you ask them, of course they learn from their mistakes, but they don't learn how to make mistakes to learn more. Does that make sense? They learn more from their successes that they share with people and sharing, hey, this is what worked. And of course, they also shared what didn't work. But does that make sense? It has two sides, that coin. All right. If I fail, I'm a failure. Not true. If you fail, you're not a failure, right? I'm still debunking a little bit the fear of failure, or take that a little bit away. And then last but not least, at least the last point that I want to talk about, is some people then it's better to do nothing than to do anything that is also caused by the fear of failure. So it's kind of, you start to procrastinate before you undertake something because you have a fear of failure. Now, failure is a scary thing, but that doesn't mean that not doing anything will definitely don't give you any gain either, right? So that's that part of this story, which is, man, I'm going slow today, right? I need to go a little bit faster. Um, so, but here, coaches, teachers, leaders, anything in that position, like myself, I'm a coach and a teacher. We have to be very careful also how we give feedback to our students, to the people that we lead, our employees, and so on and so on. Because I have another topic, and maybe should do a whole podcast on it, is what is it about honest feedback? Honest feedback, we typically mean I point out something that you didn't know so well. So if I say I just saw that my friend Matthew jumped online and say, hey Matthew, I have some honest feedback for you. Well, Matthew already know I'm not going to talk to him what he did well today. He knows already I'm going to talk to him what he didn't do so well today. So a lot of people say that's a good thing, man. Feedback is good. Here is the same thing. Let me just debunk that at all. Most time, no matter how well you phrase it, honest feedback does more harm than it does good. Let me tell you that. So I silence here a little bit so to let people either react, yes, I agree with that, Shah, or I don't agree with that. It doesn't matter where you agree with it. So that's another thing we should be a little bit more careful with do we agree and don't we agree, and this is what I do believe and don't believe. We should, it's good that we believe things, by the way. We should also do a little bit our homework, or at least people that you believe that they did their homework when they talk about these things, right? I try to talk mostly about the things. And by the way, I will say it when it's a personal belief or an assumption, so that you can do with it whatever you do. But in this case, actually, I did my homework, and most of the time I do when I talk about these type of topics, that I say, actually, if you think about these things, research actually point in a different direction. Right? We always say honest feedback is really good. Most people believe that, but research shows a slightly different direction. Is that not interesting? And therefore, we should listen, not because Jean is Shah, but we have so many beliefs in us. But if you're really honest, you don't even know where those beliefs are coming from, and they just came up, and we start to make our own story. But if you want to grow, then you at least need to also do a little bit of homework. You cannot simply think, okay, I believe this and therefore it's true. Or I heard this somewhere and therefore it's true. With some things that's a good thing. That's just maybe your moral compass and what you believe is right to do in the world and what's not. Those are your moral compasses. But if it comes to these kind of things, typically what I talk about in the place is, is that actually true? Is honest feedback, is candor always true? I know I had some tough talks with my supervisors at place, but I had really good ones, by the way. But I had a few bad ones, and then those talks would always end it with, "Well, thank you for your candor, but I actually think you're a jerk." But thank you for your candor anyhow. Thank you for your honesty. I feel really good. No, you don't feel really good at all. So when does honest feedback then work? And remember, I'm connecting this to failure. Often when we say we give honest feedback, that often means we have to, correct someone. And of course, the correction needs to be placed, or we want to help people to grow by telling them what they didn't do so well. I know that I'm a coach and a teacher, and I'm still learning how to do that best. And then, by the way, I will do a topic about, learning styles, which there's always some to debunk as well. But it doesn't exist so much either as you think it is, by the way. But anyhow, that's a whole different thing. So if you have a student or you have an employee where you have a really regular talk with, you know, a process that you work with, then actually there is more. You know that person more, and there is more openness for give direct, honest feedback. It depends on the person. So let me not take that away from you because it's definitely a thing that could work. But if it's just your yearly function, how do you call that? Your review of how your performance review. That's what I want to say. I almost wanted to say a Dutch word. Then it's maybe not so good. You might not know that person as well as you do. But if you want to give honest feedback, as a coach, you have a real responsibility to create a safe space. Um, and has a good picture how that person is before you go in there. Also, if you're invited to a feedback conversation, make sure that you are in an environment where you do feel a space to be prepared. Just don't go in there, because mentally this could affect you way more than you think. Way more. So okay. So of course, have a mentality of openness, and maybe a little bit more, positive, be make more curious. Then you might actually see the learning in there, because the person who actually gives the honest feedback, in this case would be me, might not be fully aware of the things that I'm going to tell you, and actually has the best intention for you to grow through your mistakes, because this person still has the belief that growing through mistakes is a really good thing, which I say that is only true to a small extent, not even a big extent. Okay? But since you now know this, you actually can use that to your own benefit and saying, okay, that other person might not mean it wrong. He just thinks that by just listing the things that I'm doing not so well helps me. Okay, so what you do if you hear some strong feedback thrown at you, you might ask the person, okay, from what feedback do you see that? Not from what feedback, I'm sorry, from what perspective do you see that? The person might say, hey, I'm your teacher, I'm trying to teach you best, and I want to point out the things that you don't so well, so you can correct those. And then you might say, okay, he might have said it slightly different, but maybe the content is still true. So then you take out a little bit the emotion and the feelings of it, and then it has less impact on you. If you don't do that, by the way, you will actually be pointed out that you make mistakes, and that keeps ringing in your ear. Oh, I made a mistake. You will miss the whole part of the coaching afterwards, and the coach, him or herself, should know that. But since this person is coming from the point believing that giving honest feedback and pointing out failures is good because you learn a lot through it, it doesn't work so well. Now, does that make that person immediately a bad coach or a bad leader? Not at all. I'm sure I have many beliefs and things that I did in the past or still do, and could be corrected if I have more knowledge. And we can simply not have all the knowledge in the world, so we keep growing and just do better than the day we did before. That's all we do. And if you have a coach or a leader from whom you feel that he or she does that, then it's also okay that that other person makes mistakes. Does that make sense? Right? But it's still an environment that is not the best ideal way. We're always looking at what's the ideal. Just don't be angry if it's not ideal. Doesn't make that person immediately bad, or saying, oh man, we should have another, because he didn't even know that mistakes were not so good to learn from. You did maybe not know it before you listened to the podcast either. Yeah, so actually to focusing on what went wrong needs to be done, but it's literally not the only thing that needs to be done. And this is one thing that I learned in business the hard way. In the past, I'm running a little bit over time. I hope that's good for you guys, because I think it's kind of an interesting topic. In the past, I worked for a big company, and I was a product line manager. And at some point in time, I became director of the product line management group and stuff like that. It was super cool. Not to just tell me my accolades and stuff like that, but what I noticed is for myself and also from the people in my team that we kind of started to avoid a little bit to work with the German team. Now, if you're Dutch, don't immediately make jokes about that, or English, because they are, that's normal. You don't want to work with Germans. No, no, actually, I really like to work with Germans. Seriously, true. Um, but but you know that's an internal joke. If you're from that area, you would not understand and might take it completely wrong. But please don't do that. Please don't do that. Even the Germans would understand this joke. I promise you. And but so I talked to the German leader there and said, you know, guys, we have the feeling that we cannot do anything good for you anymore. We try to do our best, but it feels like you're not appreciated for that. Now, there's two lessons in this. First of all, of course, we jumped in assumptions, and the Germans would always point out the things that we did wrong, and we became less motivated to work for them. And I had that talk with them, saying, "Hey, just I noticed that in myself, but also my team members, were not so motivated to work for you anymore because." You guys only tell us what we don't do right. Can we not do anything? Well, we don't do right. It's not anything that we do right for you guys. And then this man, his name was Stefan. Stefan said, "Oh no, Jean, we love you guys. You guys are fantastic. Best product line management team we ever had." He said, "But you have to understand a little bit things about Germans. We don't like to talk about things that go so well. We rather talk about the things that don't go well because we think it's more efficient." And it just changed my whole perspective. I said, "Okay, guys, that's really great, and I'm thankful that you made me understand your German culture, whether it's a general German culture or just the German culture of that company. I did not know that. Now I know a little bit more, but I did not know that at that time. But I want to say that my people were not motivated to learn from constantly being pointed out that they make mistakes. That's one thing. The other thing is that I had to teach the Germans lessons too. I said, hey, most of my team members are Americans. And Americans typically want to hear a little bit first what they did well. And whether that's a time waste or not, it's not a time waste, I said to Stefan. Stefan said, but it's a waste of time. In your perspective, it feels like a waste of time. But from an American perspective, it doesn't, because it motivates us. And you want to have a motivated team behind you and not a demotivated team. And that changed the dynamics. I learned a little bit more to see it the German way, and I could help my team to understand that, and the German team also learned a little bit our way. We didn't have to change anything in the work we did. It was a pure mindset of that. See, that's the interesting part. So don't always focus on what went wrong. From a German perspective, that was perfectly normal, because they said, it's only 5% that goes wrong and 90% or 95% goes well. So maybe we should talk about the 5% to get to 100%. While the Americans most of the time first, can we at least just once in a while get an acknowledgement? Not all the time, but get an acknowledgement that we do things so well. And so the language that an American in this case wanted to hear was say, hey guys, you're doing so well. If I would be Stefan, yeah? Du bist ja wunderbar, for by far the biggest part. But let's try to get those other 5% correct as well. Would you be motivated and willing to talk about it? The Americans would immediately do, yes, I would love to talk about that, right? But the German said, I don't want to talk about all that fluff. Let's talk immediately what went wrong. So in the other perspective, they were not listening anymore. See, failure, starting with the failure, it's not the best way to come out of the gate. Does that make sense? So that immediately ties into give clear expectations of results. If you know that up front, then you can also actually give better feedback to people as well, saying, hey, these were my expectations. Just in the perspective of that the expectations were not met. Maybe my expectations were wrong, and this is why I give you that feedback. It's really good to know what the expectations were. So sometimes we misunderstand each other because we have different expectations. Yeah, or we don't know what results our bosses are after. And we get a lot of miscommunication about that. And then our bosses or, our spouses or our friends or whoever it is give you feedback, and you think, oh yeah, my gosh, I was not even focused on that. I didn't know that. Does that make sense? And And then, of course, you yourself could also, listen to that first part where I say, don't always take these critiques uh, immediately negative or personal. So become comfortable with negative reactions. And also, as a leader, if you have to give some negative feedback or some honest feedback, also be sure that you can handle when the other person does that. But in most cultures, by the way, and maybe the German cultures is different. I need to research that, but I don't think in general this is true. Most people actually don't do well with critique. Seriously, we all say it that we do, but most people don't. I lived too long and I've worked in this thing too long, and I thought I was alone. I just don't deal well with negative critique. I don't like it at all. I can be very highly motivated. I reach quite a bit of success in many places, but I can tell you, I want to learn from my mistake for sure. But I don't need to have that in a negative way where it almost feels like I did that on purpose or something. If people know that I always had the best intentions to do it right, you don't have to point it out to me in such a negative way. I hate that with a passion. I say it now, right? Because, that doesn't mean that you cannot be corrected, but most people don't deal well with critique. So you could say, okay, that's dumb because honest critique is so good, or many books of it. Well, maybe it's a little bit dumb to believe that if 90% of people don't deal well with honest feedback, why should we not change the way we give feedback then? Does that make sense? Because as a coach and as a teacher, I can give my feedback in many different ways. And it doesn't always have to be negative. And I'm sure there are a lot of leaders and coaches out there who don't do it in a negative way. But still, we hear that, right? Dear Matthew, are you okay if I give you some honest feedback? It always starts negative and it never went well in your head. Sometimes it does, by the way. But anyhow, let me go. Conclude this here. So the best way to learn is, of course, is there is no best way to learn from mistakes. The majority of what you can learn from is actually from your successes. You seriously can. Multiply your successes and you will be more successful. But factor in maybe also your mistakes. And it depends a little bit in what kind of job you are. Let's say you are in a little bit more in a job where you have to do some procedures, like, you need to do this 10 times and that 10 times, then you could easily say that, you can correct each and every part, right? So research shows actually then, and that's really hard to define, but I'm giving you the research, right? If you give about 15%, you learn from your mistakes. If your mistakes are around 15%. But if you make more than 50% mistakes, you won't learn from it at all anymore. Isn't that? But most jobs are pretty binary. And that means you either do it right or you do it wrong. Right, and then it's really hard to define that 50%. You can't, right? That's impossible. So then you go a little bit like, if you make it too easy on yourself, so then you have only wins, you will learn nothing at all. And if you make it too hard for yourself, then you will learn not anything at all either. Does that make sense? You need to find a balance in there with coaches, in this case, coaches like me. But there are more out there, by the way, otherwise I would not talk about it, who understand that thing. They can find out a little bit better way to do. Rule of thumb here, by the way, you need to learn from all your successes. All your successes you can be learning from. What did I do well? Because I always say if you did it well once, you probably can do it well twice or 3 times or 4 times. Yeah? So then you have to change your process. So once you did it well, let's talk about something then. So once you did one Roomba walk well and you did the other one not so good, it doesn't matter to point out the bad things anymore. Just look at what you did well and your student probably learns much faster as well. Yeah? And, And often, is it a mistake or is it a choice, right? So does that make sense? So the best learning from mistakes does seem intuitively to fall in the middle, somewhere in the middle. It's, learn from your mistakes and learn from your wins. Unfortunately, with today's business environment, mostly business environment, we tend to focus a lot about about the mistakes. In the feedback loop, and I call it the pyramid of peak performance, right? I created something, there's always a feedback loop, right? And in that feedback loop, there is actually a big place you need to celebrate your wins too. And doesn't mean you have to go to the bar and drink a lot of beer, stuff like that. But look at it. Yeah, I see Matthew doing like, I wish we could do that too. Oh, maybe you need to do that too because it motivates you, right? And failure, we have a very natural tendency, all of us, to avoid the pain again because failure felt painful. Try to change your mind on that so that failure is not felt as pain. Once you are there, when you know that failure for you doesn't feel as pain in a certain area, let's say for me in dance, it most of the time when I practice and it doesn't go well, it doesn't feel like pain at all anymore. It just felt like a learning experience. Once you get into that phase, which is normally only true for a small part of the people, right? And be very honest to yourself. When you still feel that when your teacher talks to you and points out the mistakes, it feels like pain, you're not there yet. And that is okay. And hopefully your teacher understands that, but most don't, to be honest, and try to keep pushing you and telling you where your mistakes lie. Does that make sense? So it's on both sides. You can help your teacher and coach to say, this is not really working for me at the moment. But once you feel that you actually can take most of these things as a learning experience, then it's great. And for me, that is not in every field equally true. Obviously not. When I cook and I make mistakes, I don't care so much. But for things that I highly care about, it's a lot harder, right? So when I teach, for instance, I want to improve my teaching and I get some critique there, I always feel like, oh, that feels very painful. Right? And when I know that it's very painful, I try to avoid it and I have to do more my best to learn from it, right? So, but I always evaluate every lesson that I did, what I did well, what did I do so well, and it comes me to the last point. If you're really good at that and you become to a somewhat more self-evaluations of mistakes and you don't immediately fall in the trap, it's personal, I'm a big failure, then you can learn from it a lot. Does that make sense? Because you also equally evaluate your successes. Yeah? So, honest feedback is not always balanced between what did well and don't. Remember my story about the German team. There are two sides of it. By the way, I miss working with those guys. They were literally fantastic guys and girls, by the way. Anyhow, this was Shah at the place with another topic and hopefully debunk a little bit that failure is a really good thing to learn from. It can be, but it definitely doesn't always has to be. And research shows that you can learn as much, if not more, from your successes. Okay, this was Jean at the place. I hope to see you back next week. Oh, I almost forgot there will be a next week, but Jean won't be at the place. We'll take a break for a month, by the way. We might pop in just spontaneously a little bit with some shorter plays, but for 4 weeks there won't be at the place at this time, but we'll be back with you in June. Wish me a good break from this, and I hope to see you. I hope to see you then. This was Jean at the place. Hope to see you next time. Bye bye. Oh yeah, don't forget, of course, to subscribe. I almost forget.